This is chapter 4, the second lesson, where we're going to look a little bit more in detail at the organelles that occur within cells. Recall from our previous lesson that the two major types of cells are prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. And one thing that differentiates the two, the most important thing, is that a eukaryotic cell has a nucleus. A prokaryotic cell does not have a nucleus. In addition, eukaryotic cells generally have a larger and more complex structure in contrast to prokaryotes that are generally smaller and simpler. So because of that more complex and larger structure of a eukaryotic cell, we're going to now look at the organelles that are found in a eukaryotic cell, including the nucleus, in this and the subsequent mini lessons. Let's start with the organelles and cell structures. They may not be considered organelles, membrane-bound tiny little organs inside of a cell, but they're still part of the cell structure that are found in both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. And then we'll go beyond the ones that are only found to see the ones that are only found in the eukaryotic cells. So as shown here on this illustration comparing an example of a prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell, you see the labels in the middle that are pointing to both cells. Those would represent the organelles or cell structures that can be found in all cells, including the two examples here. So these include the plasma membrane. All cells have a plasma membrane. All cells have cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is all the stuff basically inside the cell from the inside of the plasma membrane to the nucleus of the cell. The actual fluid inside the cell that all the organelles are bathing in, that's called cytosol. If you see the word cytosol, just bear in mind that it's not the same definition as cytoplasm. Cytoplasm includes cytosol and all the organelles that are bathed in it. Okay, DNA is another structure that's found in all cells, and later we'll look at how the DNA in a eukaryotic cell is compartmentalized in the nucleus versus the prokaryotic cell. The DNA is not contained in the nucleus, it's in this nucleoid region. It's basically the part of the cell that has the DNA. And lastly, all cells have ribosomes. So be sure that you can identify the structures and organelles that are found in all cells, and also know what their function is. Why are they important to the cell? I mentioned what cytoplasm is. We're not going to get into greater detail about that, nor really the details about DNA. We've already covered some of that in chapter 3, what it is, how it's shaped. We'll see maybe a little bit of that when we talk about the nucleus a bit more. But let me give you a bit more about the other two, the plasma membrane and the ribosomes. Plasma membrane is the barrier that surrounds the cell. Some cells only have the plasma membrane, and some cells have the plasma membrane plus a cell wall. So for now, we're just looking at the plasma membrane. It's not an impermeable layer. It's actually a selective barrier that allows passage of certain molecules in and out of the cell. Things like oxygen, carbon dioxide. These are gases that need to be able to get in and out of the cell pretty easily, so they can just kind of pass through the lipid bilayer, where you see those little gray ovals. Those are the hydrophilic heads, the phosphate heads of the phospholipids. And then the yellow squiggly lines, those are the hydrophobic tails that are non-polar. Remember, they self-assemble into a bilayer where the hydrophobic regions are all facing inward, away from the surrounding water aqueous environment. Now, some materials will need the aid of a protein channel, like the one shown here. It's got like a little tunnel going through it. For certain molecules that are larger, like a glucose molecule, would need to pass through that and couldn't just go through the bilayer. So we will study this in more detail in a future chapter in the class. In fact, chapter 5 is all about the cell membrane. So for now, just know what the plasma membrane is and why it's important to a cell, and that all cells have a plasma membrane. Likewise, all cells have ribosomes because ribosomes make proteins. Without proteins, really nothing would happen in the cell. It's all about the proteins. Now, there are different kinds of ribosomes depending on where they're located in the cell. Some ribosomes are in the cytosol. They are considered free ribosomes. Free because they're not attached. They're just in the cytosol, around the cell. They're still making proteins, and generally those proteins are ones that are going to stay in that cell to support its own functions. Versus the other types of ribosomes are on the outside of the endoplasmic reticulum. Now specifically, we'll learn this in another lesson. We're talking about the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, or reverse that. I don't know where I was going with that. That's actually the rough ER, not the smooth. It's rough because it's dotted with ribosomes. They're bound to the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, these ribosomes, yes, still make proteins, but these are destined to leave that cell. They're going to get packaged up and shipped, perhaps to another cell. And in another lesson of chapter 4, we'll learn about the endomembrane system, including the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and how other organelles are involved in creating, packaging up, and exporting certain materials from a cell, a eukaryotic cell. So we're going to conclude this little mini lesson here because those are the things, again, that are found in all cells.